Hello everyone and welcome to the show. I am Pseudo and man am I excited. I was going to wait till right when the stream started with Cal and Roy and I'm assuming anyone else they want to bring on the channel, but they just put this picture up. Oh man, I feel it. I feel it coming. Show me the good stuff, boys. And am I excited. I was going to wait till right when the stream started with Cal and Roy and I'm assuming anyone else they want to bring on the channel, but they just put this picture up. Oh man, I feel it. I feel it. There we go, fix that. Sorry about that. Alright, so, without too much delay, 1 minute to go. Bladesworn, Signet buff maybe. Bladesworn reworks maybe. Bug fixes, ideally? Not too sure. Super excited though. Y'all know I'm a little bit of a Bladesworn fan, if you follow the channel at all. I got a couple builds coming up, but yeah, I've been trying to fix my build for roaming, figure out what works other than just damage. It's just damage is so boring! But maybe that's how they wanted us to play it, I don't know. 40 seconds till we find out, let's go. Oh man. They said they were gonna fix it soon, maybe they weren't lying. That'd be sweet. Let's full screen this. Get a little bit tighter angle on that for the stream. 26 seconds. Oh man. But if you're just tuning in, quick plug for the channel. This is thelazypeon with Pseudo, me. I'm a build crafter. I do lots of build videos, lots of streams for like Harvest Temple we just completed. The last one, Old Lion's Court. Challenge mode going to be starting on Harvest Temple this Sunday. And let's jump into this balance stream reaction. If you're catching the stream, shout out to me. Let me know how the audio is. Been a little bit since I streamed before the years, so let me know if it's too loud, I'm too loud, they're too loud, whatever. And I will turn my music down as soon as this starts. But for now, enjoy this rad song. Oh, there they are. No audio.
And welcome to the Guild Wars 2 live balance preview stream for the February 14th balance patch. I am Roy Marks, and I'm joined today by none other than Skills and Balance Team Lead Cal CMC Cohen. Cal, how you doing today? I'm looking at nothing.
Great. Yeah.
I feel like Cal should just be wearing a water bottle.
Again.
Love the suit, though.
Snuck in with the suit in about 10 minutes ago. We started setting up the stream, and I noticed Roy's in a suit, so he did not give me time to similarly suit up, but that may be something.
You should just have one ready. You always have to have a suit ready.
So we're here to talk about some new balance changes that are coming February 14th. As usual, the notes will be following on the forums after the stream ends. And also, as usual, there will be a couple things that we go over on the stream that are slightly different or not included on the notes that are posted, just due to the timeline into how we send notes off to get, editing and localized before the stream, and then we make a few other additional adjustments between that time and this time.
Yeah.
So what are we going to kick it off with, Roy?
Well, before
do we even show the intro slide that you had?
Before we forget,
they should have put that on the forums. People would have lost their mind.
To make sure to head over to the forums, we'll be posting the
Roy's a little quiet. I'll turn this up.
Forum post there after the stream ends, and make sure to give us your feedback because we're always looking for feedback. Always looking for it after after the stream. I just want to make sure we get that out there before we do anything. But yes, we will get over to the post there.
Yes, excellent.
Indeed. Okay. And
Roy was really excited to note that the balance update is happening on Valentine's Day. So there it is. Happy Valentine's Day, everyone.
Valentine's Day, yes. We didn't have a teaser image, unfortunately, for the blog post this time. But for anyone who is tuning into the stream a little early, we did show a little bit of maybe a teaser image or two, and we'll not two, but we'll show it up there again on screen. Anything to note here, Cal?
We'll talk about it later. I mean, it seems pretty obvious.
Ow!
The special action key that is given to you in the PvP arena that allows you to enter the defeated state immediately is now being applied game-wide.
Okay,
so
great.
We'll talk about that in a little bit.
Is it really? Is that not a joke?
Yeah. There's a couple secrets in this image that some people may have already noticed or will notice by the time we actually talk about this. We'll obviously be talking about some of these things later in the stream.
There's at least two. Just to put that out there. But yes, we will dive into it.
I'm gonna screen cap this and see if I can figure it out.
No specific order. We'll just start off with Elementalist. Why not?
Oh,
perfect.
So, yeah, everyone loves Elementalist.
Yeah, the
so
turns
what
out
do we
Dragon
got for Ellie
Tooth's a little
going
bit
on?
oppressive.
We got some updates to the staff kit, try to make the support aspects of that a little bit stronger. A couple updates to some of the weaker cantrips, especially, and maybe most importantly to a good amount of people watching the stream right now, we will be adjusting Scepter and also a little bit of Catalyst adjustments in competitive modes. And obviously it needs buffs, not nerfs, but we might have a few nerfs as well.
Buffs, not nerfs.
All right, so
shall we dive into it?
We can dive into it. So we'll show this off on stream in a moment, but yeah, we're doing a little bit of a rework, or not exactly a rework, but some buffs there for staff skills on Elementalist, mostly aimed at trying to increase its viability as a support option for staff Elementalist. So, you want to go ahead?
Yeah, there's some cool stuff in here. Nice quality of life upgrade with Water Blast. That's the water auto attack. You can now throw it at allies. This is the skill that some people may be familiar with. You shoot a projectile at an enemy, or maybe throw it into the ground, because that's actually a lot more efficient to heal nearby allies. But now you'll be able to throw that at an ally, and it will explode and heal in a radius. So you no longer have to do that kind of exciting gameplay of throwing a projectile into the ground. Got a couple of a little bit of healing buffs in there on the competitive side. Geyser. Make that a little bit more exciting. Frozen ground, not going to get Frost Roar in an area. Obviously, staff's not going to have the transmute available. That's dagger.
Sorry, I can't get over this Blade.
You'll still be able to apply Frost Roar, get some aura triggers, get a little bit more damage reduction in there.
Yeah, and we can as you continue to go over there, I'll dive into the game so we can check that out.
Solid build you have there.
Oh, thank you very much. Appreciate it. But yeah, we got the elemental staff changes here. So as we can see, blindness there on Flame Burst. Not exactly the most exciting part of that, though, but I think these notes maybe.
Geyser. Yep, you missed the Frost Aura. Good job.
You can always blast it, Might be a little bit late, but that's okay.
You can blast. You also missed the blast. This is a fantastic demonstration. One thing you might want to hover here is the Healing Rain tooltip. Is going to show that we added, some people may have seen this in the notes, but now Healing Rain is going to heal allies for each condition removed. And so this number is going to be a little bit different in PvE as well. But each condition removed from an ally will also give some amount of healing.
Absolutely. We can check out the gust indicator here. Very nice. Looking very good.
Some people may recognize that from Monsoon.
It's got to be with the target.
It has a tornado air-styled effect, so we, borrowed it and put it onto gust. Make the ground targeting, make it a little bit more skill-based, Sometimes gust will just miss, and it feels bad. So, giving a little bit more space for players to aim their gust the way they want and get rewarded or maybe get punished a little bit if
making more stuff ground targetable. All for that.
But I think that probably is good for the staff stuff.
Did you show up magnetic aura transmute?
I did.
I think you did. Yeah,
I did.
So that noticeably gives stability now instead of protection. Kind of a cool place to add stability to Ellie, because it's a case where we didn't really want to add it to Tempest specifically as now Tempest, you can play Dagger, you can play Dagger Focus, Dagger, still get access to Stab. That's already a pretty solid build. We wanted to solidify Staff as the place that you get stability. So obviously Tempest can get more mag auras from traits, can get more mag auras from shouts. So you have potentially a lot of transmutes there.
These changes so
Catalyst,
far.
You can get more mag auras from the Grandmaster trait as well, so potential for multiple transmutes in a short time period, but you will have to play staff, and so that's going to kind of create or really enable staff to be that really powerful support weapon because it gives stability to nearby allies.
Yeah.
Absolutely. But moving forward from the staff changes, we've got some kind of just general changes to various skills on Elementalist. So something I actually had on my bar at the start of that was Burning Speed, which will now stop moving if it hits a target, so you're not going to go past them. Just make that skill a little bit easier to use, a little bit better to use, feel a little better. Same thing with the rush. And then we got some cantrip updates as well.
Yeah, once upon a time, I'll just go back to touch on Burning Speed real quick here. But once upon a time, some people may remember that you could angle your camera down to kind of shorten movement skills. And so you would be able to earthquake someone that's right next to you, and then Burning Speed with the reduced range to still guarantee that hit. And that functionality was obviously removed many years ago at this point. So now you'll just be able to target your enemy, and Burning Speed will not just fly through them. You'll still have access to that old functionality if you want. If you don't have a target, Burning Speed will just continue to kind of go its normal distance. But in the event that you just want to stop at your nearby target,
then
just have an enemy targeted, and that's how it's going to work. As Roy mentioned, we have a few updates to some of the less powerful cantrips. For example, Cleansing Fire. This is a skill that doesn't see a ton of play, so it's now going to give you might stacks for each condition that you remove. So kind of an interesting place to just power up the skill a little bit, tie into a little bit of that boon style thing that some of the cantrips do. Obviously, the cantrip trait does give boons as well, and we added a kind of a new boon tie-in to Armor of Earth, where it's going to give you barrier per unique boon on you. So Cleansing Fire giving might kind of plays into that, and also
strong,
making an ammo skill, reducing the cooldown a bit. That's just going to make this a much more potent Conti Cleanse option.
Ellie already has so much Conti Cleanse. I guess that fits.
Notably, also on this page is that Soothing Disruption is not going to reduce the cooldown of cantrips anymore. And we kind of rolled that in baseline in a few cases. We see Lightning Flash getting a big reduction in PvE, Cleansing Fire obviously lower than it used to be, Armor of Earth being about the same in PvE but lower in competitive than it used to be, Ether Renewal again lower. And this is something that we're going to be seeing a bit throughout these notes, and probably a lot more in the future as well, is the idea of cooldown reduction traits and kind of how we don't necessarily want them to have cooldown reduction tied to those traits anymore.
Good. Like it.
And this is something that we've seen recently a bit, and just over the years of these traits kind of dictating the power level of all of these skills of that type. Great example is going to be Shadow Arts for Thief, back when Hidden Thief had the Deception cooldown reduction tied to it.
Is the gun
we saw a lot of issues around just Hide in Shadows even, or Blinding Powder, the cooldown being pushed so low for Shadow Arts specifically that we felt the need to nerf those skills and increase the cooldown. But then any build that does not have access to that trait just felt that much worse, because the skill is fundamentally balanced around having the cooldown reduction trait in a lot of cases. So if you don't have the cooldown reduction trait, your skill
has the same headphones I do.
And so going through and kind of pulling out the cooldown reduction aspects from these traits is going to be something that just creates a lot more flexibility in how you are able to make your build, because you'll be able to take these skills without feeling bad about not having the cooldown reduction.
Yeah. And as Cal said, something that is going to be not exactly a general theme, but a common theme throughout a lot of these notes. We've done it for a few of the other classes as well. Just something else quick to note here on the bottom of the page. We've lowered the duration of Tectonic Shift in PvP only. So this is obviously Unershield, something that we've seen being a pretty big staple of Elementalist, various Elementalist builds in PvP, and still was a little bit too powerful, so we're just lowering that duration halved. And then also, on the same vein as what we've been talking about with the cantrip traits and then various other traits, we've also removed the cooldown reduction on the Conjurer trait.
Yeah, and these are both pretty targeted at, Catalyst. Obviously, these are core early changes, but Catalyst is kind of the build that takes the most advantage of Urshield in competitive modes at the moment, or PvP specifically.
It does.
And so this is kind of the first of the notes that we see that's going to be addressing.
At least they're getting used.
That dominance.
Yeah, and I believe on the next slide we've got some. One more slide after it. But first up, we've got some. We do look at that. Have some other
Scepter adjustments.
Yeah, so obviously we did a fairly big rework of Scepter in the last patch. And, definitely a very strong, very powerful weapon, which, of course, is what we'd love to see, but maybe in competitive modes a little bit too powerful. So we are bringing that power level down a little bit, bringing a couple of those adjustments down. And a lot of this is going to just bring some ammunition down on a couple of these skills. Water Trident, Blinding Flash. We're also just lowering the weakness duration on Blinding Flash in PvP and Roll This World. And, of course, bringing some of that damage on Dragon's Tooth now that it's hitting a little bit more consistently, maybe. So bringing some of that damage back down.
Maybe dealing a little bit too much damage. But yeah, obviously, Scepter very much overperforming at the moment in competitive. There's going to be a few more changes to Catalyst that are going to affect this build as well, and affect kind of all Catalyst builds. This is something that we'll be keeping a very close eye on. And obviously, we kind of had a long period of time between the November update and the holidays and the break, and between that and this balance update, that we've kind of seen, definitely seen the full potential of what this build is capable of. So if the nerfs that we're doing in this patch are enough, we're very prepared to hit it again more quickly. It's not like we're going to be waiting for the next balance update to touch Scepter Catalyst again. But we never want to just delete this build, because it's obviously way overperforming at the moment, but it's actually kind of a fun build, and it's something that we could see being a healthy piece of the competitive landscape, assuming it's actually balanced. So we don't want to just go hard and eliminate the build in one sweep. We want to hit it pretty significantly. We see, like, you know, losing an ammo on kind of both the ammo skills and Dragon's Tooth damage coming down as well should have some impact, as well as the other catalyst changes we're doing. If it's not enough, we'll hit it pretty rapidly again.
Change the signet trait, please.
And as Cal mentioned, we've got more catalyst specific changes coming up. But before that, we've also got a couple of Tempest and Weaver changes to talk about. First up is Lucid Singularity, so that's the Alacrity Grandmaster trait there.
It's viable now.
And, you know, when this was added, obviously, great, Tempest now can give Alacrity, but this is kind of a quality of life change, really, just to make it a little bit easier to generate that quickness.
That's so good.
Alacrity.
No
right
quickness.
Now, no quickness, sorry. Now, obviously, currently on live, you only get the Alacrity when you finish channeling that overload. Some cases, you know, you don't want to have to channel that overload for all time.
This is ludicrous for World versus World, but it's so good
before you can finish that. So now you're going to pulse the Alacrity while channeling the overload. Just make that a little bit easier to get out, make it feel a lot better for the Tempests and their parties as well.
Yeah, definitely a nice quality of life improvement here. And after that, we're going to see this, and the next page is going to be kind of a lot of power Weaver buffs again. This is something that we buffed in the November update, and is actually performing, you know, pretty well in the hands of some of the best players. You see some pretty high numbers coming out of Weaver, but it feels still a little bit less accessible. So we do want to bump up kind of the minimum potential of this build a little bit, and this is something that we'll be keeping a very close eye on. Roy, if you want to go to the next slide, since we're basically talking about Weaver stuff. Definitely keeping a very close eye on this. We've kind of seen in a few cases where these more demanding builds are okay with them kind of really pushing the boundaries of maximum DPS in very elite cases, and we want to make sure that these are still feeling pretty good for the more average case. And so this is very much, you know, we saw this with Catalyst in the November update, where we had some nice Catalyst buffs, pushed the top end of Catalyst just maybe a little bit over the top, and we brought it back down a little bit. Similar case here with Weaver, where we're going to be keeping a very close eye on these buffs, and if they push Weaver a bit too far, then we will bring it back down. But we do feel like the kind of minimum effectiveness of Weaver can be brought up a bit from where it is still.
Absolutely. And I think we can just continue to move on. Once again, you know, in case you don't have time to get all these notes down, these will all be posted to the forums after the stream.
And in this video.
But here we go for Catalyst. So obviously, we've been talking about Catalyst being a little bit of a menace right now in PvP. So these are, of course, going to be PvP changes. Again, just really focused alongside a lot of those Scepter nerfs at bringing that power level of that Scepter Catalyst build down.
The deployed Jade Sphere is one's big.
Barrier on Fortified Earth is going to be coming down.
These are all pretty big,
and then cooldown increases there for Deploy Jade Spear and Elemental Celerity. Again, all PvP-specific changes.
Yeah, and these are a few things that we've seen get buffed. Kind of right after End of Dragons, Catalyst was definitely struggling to find its place in competitive, so we did buff stuff like Fortified Earth, we buffed Elemental Celerity, we buffed the cooldown on Sphere deploying. And at the time, it made a lot of sense because we were trying to kind of drive the more powerful aspects of the build to just be more powerful, because people were playing these skills already. Catalyst still underperforming, so just give them a little bit more of a nudge there. Now we see kind of the full potential of Catalyst, and so stuff like Fortified Earth can absolutely less barrier. Honestly, the skill could probably apply, 300 barrier and be a good skill, because it does have a pretty good block. Use it in Earth. In your Earth Sphere, lower cooldown, very, very powerful skill. But we're starting with about a half here, and we'll be keeping close eye on it. Similarly, Celerity and Jade Sphere cooldown were things that were previously reduced when Catalyst was kind of underperforming. We bring them back up to a bit closer to the level that we want them to actually be at. Obviously, the elite skill used to be 90, came down to 60, now it's 75. We'll see how it goes.
Yeah, absolutely.
A very strong elite skill.
But I believe that is going to be it for the Elementalist class. So we can now move on to Engineer, where we've got a couple of Scrapper updates, as well as some usability improvements there for the Mechanist and the Pistol on Engineer.
I think usability improvements is definitely a common theme that we'll see in a lot of changes this update. Obviously, we had the Alac change on Tempest. We'll see some changes to some of the kind of less used skills on a bunch of professions as well. So
giant question mark for Bladesworn.
Absolutely. So here are some of the just kind of core engineer and again pistol sort of focused updates. So just lowering the aftercast duration on fragmentation shot 25%. Poison dart volley again, similar sort of vein here. Lowering the casting time by
I wonder if that
half a
applies for
second.
the minor
Utility
trait
goggles
utility
is now
goggles
going
as well,
to
so that would be very good.
remove an extra condition, an extra damaging condition. So that's 1 to 2 conditions removed, and that's just baseline throughout the game. And then we're lowering the power coefficient per strike on Flame Jet. So that's the 1 on the Flamethrower kit there. That's a World vs. World specific change. We've seen Flamethrower having maybe a little bit too powerful in some World vs. World hands, and so yeah, just lowering the damage there a little bit.
Yeah, makes sense
really
to me.
good cleave.
You know, utility goggles. Eventually, it'll get there. We added the 1 damaging condition back in November or October, and we're now
it was
bumping
really
up
good
to
when resistance was
one day.
broken.
It'll probably just cleanse all conditions and stun break you and give you resistance out of 30-second cooldown. Then you'll play that skill. But you know, I think it's getting a little closer at 2 Condi cleanse.
Yeah, bit by bit. It's the new Shatterstone. But here we go. Scrapper now.
Yeah, so we got a handful of Scrapper notes here. The one that's probably the most exciting to me on the competitive side is the damage dampener note here. And this is a trait that...
I really like that trait.
Well, long story short is rapid regeneration is a trait that used to exist in this slot. And this was kind of like the defining sustain trait for Scrapper. It was the trait that was like, hey, you know, when I have swiftness or super speed, you get kind of a pulse healing effect.
Which one is that?
And
is
that really was kind of one of the key pieces
no
of
way that's the
Scrapper
barrier one,
on the
right?
competitive side. That got replaced by damage dampener at one point, and damage dampener hasn't had the same impact. It's kind of a much more niche, effect where sometimes it's very valuable, sometimes it doesn't really do a whole lot for you.
That's the delay
And
strike
so
one.
as we're looking to kind of bring up
Scrapper's gonna be
Scrapper,
war.
especially like the bruisery Scrapper builds, bringing back
And
a
they
good
have auto
sustain trait
barrier,
in that slot
auto
was
barrier,
really
auto regeneration.
something that we
It's
wanted
going to
to
be
do.
so
And
hard
this
to
obviously
deal with.
competes with object in motion as kind of the defining
Yeah,
damage
who
trait, so
cares?
you will have to pick damage or sustain
Dude,
with your Scrapper
object in
builds,
motion
but this
sucks.
gives you
This
the
is
option
nuts.
to really play into that bruisery Scrapper playstyle with rapid regeneration once again. And of course, the bottom note here is more of a PvE focus change for Power Scrapper, is just bumping up the bonus power per might stack that applied force grants you. And also this is going to similarly
better
reduce
warrior.
the condition damage penalty. That is just not communicated here on the patch note, so good job, me.
Yeah, definitely your fault. But moving on now to the Mechanist usability improvements. So again, this is just
nuts.
aimed at making, playing the Mechanist feel a little bit better. One thing that's probably pretty important to note here is
Also
Mechanical
good
Genius.
stability.
So the duration of the buff is now going up from 6 seconds to 10 seconds. And that's really just aimed at making that penalty when that buff falls off feel a little bit easier to play around, a little bit easier to play with. We still want it to feel punishing. We still want it to have an effect, but make it just a little bit easier to play around, where we've seen maybe it struggle to not.
If it still
feel
does
as
the check
punishing,
every 6 seconds, that's fine.
at that 6 second timer.
Yep, and also a nice note here is that we've kind of fixed the mech auto attack speed, where some people have noticed that it slowed down significantly, and that was definitely not intended, so that is now fixed. You will once again see a more kind of natural attack sequence from the mech. And then also, kind of the rest of these notes are all playing into the same idea of the top note here of there's actually an issue with Mechanist where a lot of the mech skills are actually sourced from the engineer at the moment. And so, you use a skill that applies protection on your mech skill, and it's actually being applied by the engineer, which really doesn't make a whole lot of sense. That's not really how other pet mechanics are kind of intended to work. So part of this update was fixing that interaction, making sure that mech is sourcing its own boons and conditions,
and then
trying to make sure that we're outputting about the same amount here, right? Because obviously the mech previously did not inherit from incendiary powder, did not inherit from serrated steel, these things that increase the outgoing condition durations. And similarly, the concentration bonus for the mech here is getting bumped up a bit here, just to make it feel a bit more similar as the mech is now sourcing all these things, but we don't want it to be a significant loss for the build overall. This is something that we'll be keeping a pretty close eye on. Do we need to bump up Condiment a little bit more? Do we need to bump up some of the durations a little bit more? But the key of this change was making sure that the mech is sourcing its own boons and conditions, because realistically that just makes sense.
Absolutely. All right. I think we can move on from Engineer there now to everyone's favorite green class, Necromancer.
That's not everyone's favorite green class. JK, it is. Oh, stream froze.
So we got a couple of core weapon updates here, specifically Warhorn and Dagger, as well as looking at improving
ancillary
Reaper
X buffs. Come on.
maybe some competitive focused Reaper
There's the
improvements
water.
as well. So here we go. We've got Warhorn and Dagger buffs. So a while back, back when Warhorn 4 used to daze, it was also unblockable. When it was changed to fear, that was removed. It will now be unblockable again.
All fears are
similar
now
to
unblockable.
other changes we've had, Banshee as well, so that is no longer going to reduce the cooldown of Warhorn skills, and so we're just going to roll those baseline in for both Whale of Doom and Locust Swarm.
Yeah, Whale of Doom specifically was like, it was kind of something we were a little worried about when we were shifting it from a daze to a fear. It's like, well, this is a little scary if it's unblockable, right? Realistically, well, it's a little scary because it's fear. I didn't even think of that until right now, so it's hilarious. Totally derailing the stream, classic. But yeah, we've kind of seen that Warhorn isn't super, as strong as we want it to be. So we're once again adding that unblockable, making it feel a little bit more powerful, a little bit more potent, and maybe a little bit more scary. Moving on to the Dagger stuff, this is kind of trying to solidify Dagger as a little bit more of like a bruisery weapon, not completely, but compared to something like Axe, we want Dagger to stand out as more of like a better life force generator or like a better boon rip source for sure. So that's where a lot of these changes are focused. We see some life force increases on the auto attack in addition to a damage bump in PvE. But then also Dark Pact is going to grant life force per boon removed. And so a slight adjustment here on the competitive side is that it's now going to just remove boons instead of corrupting them. And this is because we wanted to increase this number, but we feel like pretty concerned. Like if we just bump this up to a 3 boon corrupt on Dark Pact and PvP, that would be pretty problematic, I think. Yeah. So making it just a boon rip in competitive modes allows us to really make it a threatening boon rip skill and not have to worry about the kind of added effects of corrupting. And then also adding on this life force component. So now it's going to grant you life force for every boon that you remove.
I like it.
Yeah. And just
a little bit more. Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, just go over the numbers because obviously there's 3 splits here for the numbers. It is going to be 3. Sorry?
No, go ahead.
It is going to be 3 in PvP, 2 in World vs. World, and 3 in PvE. Obviously, just the various adjustments there. But yes, this will all be on the forums after this.
And I guess a quick final note there that may have been noticed already. Dark Pact is also just going to naturally inflict bleeding on the enemy target as well. And this was just kind of a change that made sense because Life Siphon also cares about bleeding targets, and Dark Pact, nothing on the Dagger kit applies bleeding. The initial idea behind that was kind of that you would apply the bleeding to yourself with Dark Pact, then transfer it with something else, then get the full value of Life Siphon. But that ends up being a little bit too...
It's too much in today's...
Not really clunky, but it demands a lot more resources than you might want it to, or rather that we want it to, in order to get that value from Life Siphon. So Dark Pact will just apply a couple bleed stacks.
I agree.
Absolutely. Moving on from the Dagger and Warhorn changes. So these are the Reaper Shout and Reaper changes. So just right at the top, Augury of Death is no longer going to reduce the cooldowns of shouts. A lot of those have been just brought in baseline. So again, similar to every other time we've done this so far in this patch. And then all of these shouts themselves are going to grant additional effects and damage if you are within melee range of your target. So right now, you're still going to have that range on the shout. You're still going to hit a target even if you're not in melee range. But if you are in melee range with that shout, it will improve the shout itself and how much damage it does and what it is doing to your target.
Yeah, and this is really trying to solidify Reaper as kind of like that really in-your-face melee playstyle, and it's obviously a little bit of a higher risk for something like Reaper to dive into melee range, but now shouts are going to be that much more rewarding. You're going to get more life force, bonus effects on all these things.
Still isn't good enough.
Suffer actually potentially very powerful now, transferring 2 conditions per target. That's something we're keeping a pretty close eye on for
Suffer
sure.
Was always
especially on cooldown always.
Yeah, and World v World players, don't worry. Rise is still only going to summon 3 minions. We're not going to allow you to hit 2 targets and summon 5 minions, which may have created the same problem that we saw previously with Rise.
Yeah, so that is still going to be split. And then moving on to the other Reaper changes, again, sort of kind of focus on competitive a little bit. But in PvP, we are going to now make it so that the cooldown on Chilling Victory, the ICD on it, is going to go down from 2 to 1 seconds.
Wow, that's good.
And then just game-wide, Blighter's Boon will now trigger when you remove a boon from an enemy instead of just when you apply a boon to yourself.
Yeah, and so that's really trying to kind of create the option for Reaper to get a little bit more defense if they want it, because obviously Blighter's Boon does compete with Reaper's Onslaught in that trait slot.
The problem is
very
Reaper's
powerful
Onslaught
offensive option to get
now.
quickness, get the extra ferocity, all that good offensive stuff. But if you want to get a little bit more defense, because Reaper does have some naturally pretty powerful offense as well, then you can now go into Blighter's Boon. This is something that we want to be a powerful defensive option, so adding the Boon Rip trigger as well gives it a little bit more potency there. We are considering kind of making the Boon Rip component also more rewarding. That's not something we did initially. It's just going to use the same value as when you apply a boon to yourself, but that's something we might do in the future. If this still isn't quite getting there, we could definitely make a more powerful reward for removing a boon, because that is much harder to do than applying a boon.
Absolutely.
And Chilling Victory, I think it was nerfed maybe like 6 or 7 years ago in PvP.
A while back.
Yeah.
Right after it came out.
Anymore.
Yeah. All right. Moving on from Necromancer, it's everyone's favorite green class, Ranger. And so we've got a bit of an update to Wilderness Survival. We got
Necromancer was everyone's favorite green class.
I've heard it both ways.
I heard it on the stream.
Yeah,
we've also got several traits that will be removing the CDR from them, and potentially adding a little bit extra to some of them. And we're looking at the stances on Soul Beast.
Heck yeah.
Yeah, so kicking it off, we got a couple of Wilderness Survival updates here at the top to Empathic Bond and Rugged Growth. And this is really trying to kind of bump up the survivability of certain Ranger builds.
Well, engine's really good already.
We've seen, the strength of roaming Ranger builds, whether it's, Untamed or Sick'em Soul Beast or things along those lines. But the more bruisery side node type builds from Ranger, from either Soul Beast or the potential for Untamed, really as much of a side node, but more of that bruiser playstyle, not as powerful. And that's really because Rugged Growth got hit pretty significantly.
That's actually really interesting, because half of Ranger's Condi Cleanse is in the Quickening Zephyr minor.
Bumping that back up to, obviously it's not going back to the old value, but establishing again Wilderness Survival as that good defensive trait line for Ranger is going to help with some of these more defensive focused builds. And Empathic Bond is another piece of that, because this is a trait that's kind of trying to be a Condi Cleanse trait in a sense, where your pet takes some of your incoming conditions, but not all of them.
Oh no, I'm wrong.
And
it's the
realistically, it's just not very effective, and we wanted to rework it both into something more active and something a bit more powerful. So now, anytime you use a Beast skill, it is going to cleanse conditions from both you and your pet. And a couple of notes here that are important. It does have an ICD. There's about, I think it's a 20-second cooldown. So you can't just get too much value from birds, but that cooldown is also going to refresh anytime you swap pet. So there's not going to be as much of a worry about
that's weird.
Using a beast skill and then maybe tracking the cooldown as much. You still have to track the cooldown, but you know for a fact if you swap pets and if you press a beast skill again, that will also cleanse you. So potential for a lot of burst cleanse in like a short period of time. Beast skill swap, beast skill is going to cleanse you 4 conditions. Pretty strong trait, but it is a Grandmaster trait.
Oh, I guess the other bird skill would be on cooldown, so it wouldn't matter.
Feel is something that can also open a lot more doors for Ranger, so they aren't as locked into their Condi removal utility skills if they take Empathic Bond.
Yeah, and then survival skills, going to be losing that cooldown reduction on the trait. One thing that's kind of important to note here is that a lot of these cooldowns are going to be just, they're going to be lowered baseline, but we were very, cognizant of the fact that Druid in World versus World, especially after the October buffs that we had to it, is starting to be seeing a lot more play, especially in small scale where, the Amoeba is a lot more relevant. We didn't want to basically just give those cooldowns to Druid for free. And so Muddy Terrain is not going to have that cooldown rolled in baseline. We did do it for Entangle in World versus World, but that's already competing with Glyph of the Stars, so it doesn't seem as big of an issue there. But that's certainly something that we're keeping an eye on. But otherwise, just lowering the cooldowns on a lot of these survival skills because of that removal from the trait.
Yeah,
Ancient Seeds is ridiculous.
Sure. Next up, we've got some Warhorn changes again here for Ranger.
Yeah, Warhorn and Signet kind of getting the same cooldown reduction trait removal that we've seen, on a bunch of things. Warhorn, it's, in kind of an out of the way, depending on your build, it's harder to go into nature magic, right? So we don't necessarily want you to have to play nature magic to get Warhorn, because there are some good skills on this. Call the Wild, pretty powerful skill now. Hunter's Call, obviously a solid damage option. But
unblockable
now,
this patch.
you just have more flexibility to slot this into your builds without feeling like you are being punished for not playing a particular trait line. And with the Signet cooldown reduction trait, Brutish Seals, this is one of the traits that felt like it would be a bit weak if it didn't have cooldown reduction because it was simply AoE Fury. And that's fine, but not exciting. It's a master trait. Let's bump up the power level a little bit. That's also not going to grant AoE Might for any time you use a Signet. So now Signets are going to give AoE Might, AoE Fury,
really good changes.
And that trait will no longer give cooldown reduction. So we have lowered the cooldown on a few of these Signets here. And a minor update to Signet of the Hunt as well, just trying to make it a more potent, a more general option instead of a very specific use case. It's now going to give you super speed in addition to unblockable stacks, so it does give a lot more utility value if you end up taking Signet of the Hunt. And potentially, with the Brutish Seals, get Might Fury, unblockable to yourself, super speed to yourself. Potentially, maybe. I don't know. You probably still don't play it, but we'll see.
It's fun on second build.
It's certainly a lot more attractive now. Signet Renewal also going to be getting resolution as well as resistance, just to basically keep your pet alive a little bit longer.
Knows what's stupidly good and what's
it was only going to be preventing those movement impairing conditions.
At least they're looking
now,
at stuff.
Stop all conditions from damaging the pet, affecting the pet.
Stuff, not touching one skill and then never touching it again.
That's a skill that got hit pretty hard by the resistance rework because it granted resistance back when resistance was super powerful, so it did keep your pet alive. We added resolution. We did actually consider making a very specific, unique pet-only resistance type buff for this skill that would make your pet Condi immune for 2 seconds. We're just starting it out with, a resolution, an actual boon in our game, seeing how it plays, but we may revisit that because it would be nice if your pet didn't immediately die after playing conditions from all your nearby allies.
It's why you press it and then swap
pets. Move on to Soul Beast and Untamed. And so I'll just go ahead and skip all the Soul Beast stuff and look at the Untamed note, which is that a natural traversal, that's the port skill on Untamed, is now not going to be an instant cast, which, we were seeing a lot of interactions with Untamed, specifically in competitive modes, where you would port in with Cage or port in with Maul, and it was just a little bit too powerful of an interaction there. So it's now going to have a small cast time, but that will prevent you from being able to port in and already be casting skills and follow up, a little bit slower.
So it's definitely going to have a pretty big impact on the play patterns that Untamed is capable of doing. So we didn't want to do too many further adjustments in this same update. We want to see what happens with the unnatural traversal change. Is Cage still as much of a problem if you can't port in during the cast? Is the damage still too high? Probably, maybe. But again, this is going to be a pretty big shift in Untamed gameplay, and we want to see what happens, and then we'll follow up with additional changes as needed.
Yeah.
Moving into some of the Soul Beast stuff, we can start with kind of one of the more exciting changes, which is somewhere in the middle here. But Primal Cry, this is the deadly, I believe it's the deadly, hopefully it's the deadly merge skill for Untamed. This is the skill that applies vulnerability and bleeding and does a little bit of damage when you use it. It's now also going to apply poison. And so this is kind of a nod to just condition-based Soul Beast builds in general, because this is kind of a cool place to put damage in. Adds to some of the poison interactions, the Unranger traits and Soul Beast traits, and just makes the skill a little bit more potent. And that's going to kind of add, alongside some of these other changes that are more competitive focused, of trying to potentially make, side node Condi Soul Beast into a potent option, because we see Eternal Bond healing coming up. We're going to see, we already saw it, Wilderness Survival buffs increasing sustain as well. And then also potentially some of the boon-based Soul Beast builds maybe coming back. We see Moa Stance cooldown coming back down, Doliak Stance cooldown coming back down with a duration shave in competitive. This is something that we've seen on a lot of skills with that do stability and stun breaks for a long duration. They kind of got bumped up to 60 seconds in PvP, and we see this with like Doliak Signet, Doliak Stance, Armor of Earth, all these skills, because that amount of stability was just a little bit too much. But we're trying to bring the cooldown back down to make these skills a bit more appealing, while also reducing the duration just so it doesn't blow out the stability too much. But it does make Doliak Stance, again, kind of like a very appealing option.
Where's that he uses blowout in both positive and negative connotation? I think he meant it negative there, so that stability is still relevant.
All right, moving on from Ranger, we get to Thief.
He's going to be last.
So Thief is going to have kind of similar to Ranger. We're looking at the Signets and the Tricks trait. And so we're going to be looking at some CDR overhauls for them. We're also going to be looking at Deadeye's mark usability improvements and some rifle damage adjustments for PvE on Deadeye, of course.
All right, so
yeah.
You want to kick things
off? Oh my gosh, initiative when activated?
With the Signet trait, it's now going to be reworked. It's going to cause Signet skills to grant initiative when activated, which definitely sounds like a pretty powerful
Thief already has really good
focus.
utilities.
Trying to maybe get that trait used a little bit more, give some initiative to the Thief. Right now, it's just going to be 1 initiative per Signet. So hopefully that won't blow things too far out of proportions. We are going to keep an eye on it. If it seems like it's still not really a good option, even at that, with the extra initiative on it, we are going to consider potentially bumping that up a little bit. But it's definitely something we wanted to start out at 1, just to be safe, because getting more initiative is definitely a very powerful function for Thief.
I was going to say, I know nothing about Thief, but I know that initiative is good.
And so obviously we see some cooldown reduction and on some of the signets that really need it. But Signets of Power was a trait that we didn't really see a lot of play with. And so something that we do well removing the cooldown reduction from these traits is, well, if no one plays the trait, then we don't necessarily need to roll in all the cooldown baseline, because there's no real expectation that these skills are balanced around that, because, well, no one's playing this trait, so they're not getting the cooldown reduction.
I'm playing the warrior trait.
So it'll be like Signet of Agility is not getting a cooldown reduction because that skill is already pretty good, and you weren't playing Signets of Power, you're fine with the current cooldown, we're keeping to that current cooldown. Whereas things like Signet of Infiltration, Signet of Shadow, Signet of Malice, things that don't get as played, are going to get that
exploding right now.
Built in baseline.
Absolutely.
And then for the trick side of things, kind of a similar thing where not all tricks got the cooldown reduction, notably like Withdraw, already a very powerful skill even without Trickster. Trickster is a trait that also doesn't get played too much, competes with Bountiful Theft, tough one to beat. But now we're bumping up the Condi removal from 1 to 2, which does make it a potentially really interesting
Condi
cleanse
trait,
option for Thief if you are playing a lot of
OP.
tricks. And just some cooldown reduction getting rolled in here. Baseline roll from initiative notably is kind of in a similar place to Doyak's Dance and the like, where the cooldown is much higher because the combination of the stun break and the effect is a bit too powerful. But reducing the cooldown to make the skill more appealing, and then reducing the secondary effect just to make it, hey, this is a stun break that also gives you a little bit of value.
I guess grab
and
your
now
weapons
the
wasn't a
cooldown
hint
is
at
just
all.
a lot more usable.
Absolutely. Couple more sort of core Thief changes, as well as some Daredevil stuff. So Skulk Venom, just having a little bit of cooldown reduction. It's not a heal that we see being used very often. Keen Observer in PvE specifically is going to have that health threshold requirement lowered. So instead of having to be 90% health, now 75% health, just make that feel a little bit less punishing. And then probably the big change here is that Steel for Daredevil is no longer going to be replaced by Swipe.
Okay,
so
well, I give
have
up.
the normal Steel ability here on Daredevil.
The
main reason for this is just that we felt having baseline unblockable on, well, the Steel skill specifically was just a little bit too powerful. But we are also going to be lowering the cooldown baseline on Steel from 30 to 25.
Both versions are so good.
Yep, that is accurate. And a couple other Daredevil changes to round out the slide. Just some cooldown reduction on some skills that don't get as
reading behind him.
The Keen Observer thing is notably kind of it's obviously going to affect all Thief builds, but it's a little bit Deadeye aligned, because Deadeye is so reliant on having crits to generate Malice. So relaxing that threshold is going to make that it's obviously a buff, but it's almost like more of a quality of life focused improvement for that build. And we're going to see another one. I think it's on the next slide.
Quality of life improvements.
I believe it might be.
Yes, we are on the Deadeye slide. So Deadeye's mark, this is no longer going to be removed when you go down. So I guess, again, just a nice quality of life improvement. In the event that you go down, you're not going to lose your mark when you get revived. You're still going to have the same amount of Malice when you get picked up. And that's just going to, make sure that this playstyle is not super disrupted just because, whoops, you accidentally went in the down state. And beyond that, we have, a lot of rifle buffs, as we alluded to earlier. This is kind of a case where Deadeye is now super dagger focused. We've seen, the strength of Deadeye builds is with dagger now, and we wanted to see, we made some rifle buffs, the improvements in the previous patch to allow you to move a little bit while kneeled. Rifle's still not quite up to the level that we would need it to be for people to consider it a serious option. So bringing up the damage in a lot of cases is kind of the first step in doing that.
Yeah, and then the final note here, also probably good to call out, is that
Just a minor
Shadow
one
Meld.
here.
It's a
Yeah,
little change.
right.
For competitive modes, Shadow Meld, the Elite on Deadeye, is now no
great.
longer going to remove Reveal.
Wonderful.
You know, we felt that specifically with competitive modes,
There's an
it
angry Reddit
was
post,
already a
but
very
it's so
powerful ability
oppressive.
that, you know, it's an ammo skill that grants you stealth. It's on a relatively short cooldown, and being able to remove Reveal from yourself, the counter to stealth, seemed a little bit too strong. Again, specifically, you know, in competitive modes.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, you might even call it a little bit unhealthy. At least,
could.
you know, I would. So
It's a word you could use.
You know, we do kind of intend that revealed is the counterplay to stealth. So having a skill that removes revealed and applies stealth, fundamentally problematic. And so making it not have that same impact in competitive modes, definitely the direction that we want to see.
Absolutely. And I believe, we got some Spectre changes. Look at that.
Yeah, these were Roy actually forgot to add these during our practice run through, which is why he's making such a big deal about it right now. But they are obviously now here. You want to talk about them?
Well, okay. So Shadow Sap is now going to have the enemy targeted version of the skill grant Might and Area on the Spectre. And the ally targeted version will grant protection. Just kind of to try and
some more support.
Give Spectre a little bit more ability to play around groups as opposed to just single targets. Well of Silence has been reworked, which is now going to daze enemies on the initial strike, and then remove conditions from allies in the area on each pulse. You'll gain Shadow Force for each condition removed, and it's a bit of a lower cooldown in competitive modes. And so this is obviously just trying to make that well feel a little bit better to play with. We didn't really see it being taken very often, and kind of similar with Well Bounty, and similar to getting, you know, Spectre maybe a little bit more play for group play specifically, has a little bit more of an ability to give might to groups, increasing the might stacks from 6 to 8 on that well.
Yeah.
Stuff.
Kind of might generation of support builds is a pretty excuse me.
You're excused.
Thank you. My generation on support builds is kind of a I don't know if I would call it a hot topic, but it's a very important topic because some builds just fundamentally are able to provide a very large amount of might stacks, and some builds are less capable of providing really any might stacks. And this is probably a bigger project that we want to reevaluate in the future to make sure that the overall amount of might that we're giving out is reasonable. Maybe we don't want a single build to easily upkeep 25 might without investing too much. That's not something that we're going to be doing in the near future, but in the short term, we do want these builds that just have minimal access to might to have more competitive amount of might. So we're going to see that on Spectre. We're going to see that, spoiler, we're going to see that a little bit on Chrono later in the stream.
Heck yeah.
And notably, Well of Silence was kind of a less powerful skill, also kind of a potentially unhealthy mechanic where it had a pulsing daze component.
Yes, it's awful.
We reworked that to
kind of like
only
the
daze on the
thing.
initial strike, and then make it just to make it a more something we feel more comfortable having a lower cooldown and competitive, and then giving it an avenue to also be an interesting potential Condi removal aspect for Spectre builds.
Yeah, absolutely. And I believe that will now wrap up the thief changes. So we've got Revenant here. So putting some Fury Share, or buffing the Fury Share there on Renegade. And then for competitive, we've got some Renegade damage adjustments as well as some Vindicator adjustments.
Those are good slides.
Those are going to be focused mostly on the competitive
Probably
modes.
boring as crap for most people, but I love this.
Revenant Renegade, Resilient Spirit, which is kind of aimed a little bit more at Vindicator, but it is obviously going to be a core rev change. And this is specifically for PvP. We're just reducing the barrier per unique boon from 160 to 119. Just was having a little bit too much of a powerful effect there. And again, mostly because of Vindicator.
Yeah, so we'll see a couple other Vindicator nerfs on a future slide, but running through some of the Renegade changes here.
Really?
Endless Enmity. This is the minor trait that applies Fury to yourself when you critically strike an enemy that is under half health. And this is something where we saw an opportunity to kind of give Revenant a bit more Fury sharing, similar to how we want to improve might sharing capabilities for a lot of support builds. Fury is also a pretty significant boon.
Brutal momentum buff.
Groups to have.
Brutal momentum is already brutal.
Boon. So this was a great opportunity, as we're looking at this trait that's kind of weak already, to make it a bit more potent in group scenarios.
Okay.
And so it's no longer going to have the health threshold requirement. It's just going to trigger on any critical hit, and that Fury is going to be area of effect. So nearby allies will get that Fury as well.
Yeah.
Beyond that, we have a couple of damage improvements for Renegade and competitive modes. This is a build that we saw a little bit in the past. Short bow, like Roamer style Shiro Renegade.
Huge.
Not as powerful these days after it got nerfed. Bringing it back up a little bit. Trying to make it a more competitive pick. Another nice note for that build and just Renegade in general is changed to brutal momentum. Currently, this trait only gives you crit chance if you are at full endurance, and it gives you a lot of crit chance. Now it's going to give you a little bit of crit chance all the time, and that same large amount if you are at full endurance. So in more realistic gameplay scenarios on the competitive side especially, where you do have to dodge, you'll still be getting some value from this trait.
Yeah. It was seeing some play in World vs. World, not a lot, of course, but it was also, kind of optimal to just never dodge, and in World vs. World, that might be a little bit of a tall ask, so definitely, a nice change to the trait there to potentially make some DPS Renegade builds a little bit more viable.
You have to especially in World vs. World.
Rounding out the notes, there is a fun note for core Revenant players. Ancient Echo is going to now reapply the Tranquil buff for Ventari stance. That's the one that makes your next Ventari ability empowered. So core Revenant players rejoice, I suppose. But also the final note here for Renegade is kind of an increase to the alacrity duration on orders of above. And this is going to just allow a bit more flexibility in terms of how you gear. Not going to require as much boon duration, give you space to have a bit more damage on your Alacrin builds.
I like their hairs coming in from the charity stream.
Here for Vindicator. So again, these are going to be mostly focused on the competitive side. In fact, pretty much all focused on the competitive side. And so, Vindicator, definitely a pretty strong option in competitive and PvP. It's been overshadowed a little bit by some of the other specs that we've seen come into play a bit more recently, but still definitely really good. And of course, since we're bringing those down, we found it prudent to also, look at it here in this patch. And again, main sort of focus here is we want to try and get Vindicator to maybe go off of that Salvation trait line, go into a bit more of an offensive-focused trait line like Devastation. And so in order to do that, in order to get the same amount of damage that it is doing now. And so we've lowered the power coefficients on a lot of skills here, as well as we're removing the chill effect from Imperial Impact in PvP and World vs. World.
Yeah, and that's really...
Hey, what's up, Diker?
Honestly, kind of like a purity of purpose focus change.
Whoa.
Yeah, I don't know what I was trying to say. But Imperial Impact, this is kind of the do-everything dodge, right? It applies chill, it applies boons, it does a little bit of damage. It extends boon duration. Very, very powerful. This kind of refocuses a bit toward the boon component in on the competitive side, where it's not going to have that chill. It's going to have a little bit less damage. And, this is, again, kind of targeted at Vindicator.
I don't know, man.
In competitive
I just saw what you wrote.
And wrapping up the changes, we do have a slight healing nerf to Vindicator in World vs. World. Saint of Zuhelzer, this is the buff that's applied by the heal dodge. Instead of 20% outgoing healing, it's going to be 10% outgoing healing. Because we do kind of see the strength of Vindicator healing builds just due to the critical mass of healing modifiers that exist right now. So toning that down a little bit, kind of trying to reduce the crazy healing of that build in World v. World.
Yeah, especially compared to a lot of the other sort of main supports that you see taken in World vs. World, it is healing a little bit too much, and they're not healing as much. So trying to lower the outgoing healing just a little bit there on that build. But now, look at this, a familiar image. We've brought ourselves back to the teaser image.
Let's do it.
So hopefully everyone's figured out exactly what is going on here. But if not, well, then unfortunately, we're going to tell you. So one probably important thing to note here is that this is an image from PvP. The third ability here, Artillery Slash, is actually only going to have 2 charges in PvP after the rework. And, well, wouldn't you know, it is in fact a rework of the Gun Saber for Bladesworn.
Good.
Among other things, there's some other things here, but we'll
the
talk about that
actual
soon.
key piece of this image is that the Bladesworn is standing fairly far away from its target.
Okay, I wasn't sure. 12?
Yeah.
You get 12?
Keen eyes may notice that the out-of-range indicator on the auto attack is not showing.
Oh.
And why would that be, Willie?
Heck yeah!
Where's the 2?
Whoa!
Oh,
second ability, interesting. And so that would in fact be because we have added a projectile attack to the 1 and the 2.
Amazing.
Basically to enable Bladesworn players to still do damage, still have some function while they are at range. In a lot of cases, especially in PvE encounters, you'll be, while still obviously a very powerful build, you'll be forced to kind of have to move out of range of a boss. And so it does feel a little bit bad when, you are locked into this gun saber. You're locked out of having a second weapon set to be never really able to do anything at range a lot of the time. So now you will be able to. Something also that's probably important to note is that this won't be a damage increase, because Bladesworn already is doing quite a bit of damage, especially in PvE. If you stood at range the entire time and only auto-attacked, and we'll obviously show this off, you would be doing less damage than if you were in melee range. But we can just look at the gun saber. Well, look at that. Whoa, warrior changes, gun saber update, and some spellbreaker adjustments. Yeah, we're not only doing Bladesworn changes for this patch, but these are going to be the specific changes here for Bladesworn, and then we'll go into game in just a second and actually show those off if you want to.
Yeah, so really the idea behind these changes to Bladesworn is that as a Bladesworn, gun saber is kind of one of your weapons, and the trade-off for the mechanic for the elite spec is that you can't swap weapons while in combat, so you have one weapon and you have your gun
get regular burst skills.
And because of that, we want to make sure that gun saber is kind of a more generalist, more of a flexible kit, where you can have things that work regardless of what your other weapon is. So adding the range component is a big piece of that. Adding a little bit of crowd control onto the 3 skill, that's the rework that Roy alluded to. Where now artillery slash is going to consume all ammo, similar to how like the pistol 5 skill works, and then it will get enhanced bonuses based off how much ammo you spend. So if you only spend 1 ammo, it's basically going to be the same as it is right now. It's going to give you the same amount of damage that it does currently.
Yeah,
and it's going to apply
I knew it.
Then if you spend 2 ammo, it's going to now daze instead.
Nice.
And in PvE, if you spend 3 ammo, it will also stun. And we felt that the kind of power upgrade between the daze and the stun wasn't necessarily that important in PvE, or in PvP rather. We wanted to just have the daze component. We didn't want to have the stun that now deals damage and worry about that, having the feels bad cases of actually spending 3 charges and dealing way less damage. So we're just capping it at 2. Get to 2 charges, get the daze. It's a 2-second daze in competitive, 1-second daze in PvE, because the stun in PvE is actually the 2-second duration.
It's not enough, but
so that's
just
going to give a more crowd control option to the gun saber kit. And another thing that we wanted to do here, we've kind of wanted to do this gun saber work for a little while as well. It's just something we held off on
a block
kind of throughout the dominance of Bladesworn in PvP.
It wasn't Bladesworn, it was the shout trait.
We kind of saw the tactical reload change, refocused it on Bladesworn skills only in the much healthier and fair, balanceable nature of that skill, kind of significantly affected Bladesworn in those modes, which makes sense because it's just a lot weaker overall. But now we can go back, we can make all of the gun saber skills that much more exciting. Tactical reload going to play into those as well. So you'll get the cooldown, get 1 ammo on to artillery slash, pop the elite. That's also now going to be a daze. Another minor update here that may not have been seen on the stream yet.
Very good.
The 4 skill, Cyclone Trigger. This is going to now grant you Aegis on activation. So this is going to, the idea is that it's a projectile block, but now will also block a single incoming attack.
Good.
And we had a crazy idea of, hey, what if Cyclone Trigger blocked all attacks for the duration?
Oh yeah, that'd be fightable.
Maybe not the healthiest or the safest idea.
Nope.
Keeping it with Aegis makes it a lot more skill intensive. Block the key ability, block the incoming CC or whatever big damage is coming in, and still get that defensive value without becoming too much of a problem. And it's still going to be that
Fury, darn it,
as well. So pretty cool set of updates to the gun saber here.
Wonder why I got 4 might.
Absolutely. And again, this will all be on the forums if you want to read over them and you don't have quite as much time as you would like to read them here. But we are going to move on. Oh my goodness, our cameras are actually covering this last change, so we'll have to read that out. But
wow, who made these slides?
I don't know. That couldn't have been me.
Might have been you.
Nice, still
but we're going to have quite a few changes here for Warrior, just kind of core Warrior. A couple of them are going to be aimed a little bit more at Spellbreaker in PvP.
50%
again,
is,
we mentioned earlier on the initial slide that we're focusing a little bit on some Spellbreaker adjustments for competitive modes for PvP. So a couple of these core changes are going to be focused on that. But a lot of them are just looking at various Warrior changes.
Goodbye, Adrenal Health. It was nice while it lasted.
Mace adjustments here.
For literally one patch.
A little bit of a lower cooldown in competitive modes. And then just baseline Pummel Bash is going to grant barrier if it strikes an enemy while they're using a skill. And so this is just kind of, to try and make Mace feel a little bit better to use, a little bit more defensive, sort of focus on, that sort of defensive-ish style that Mace has.
Yep, absolutely.
These are all just so ancillary.
Sword, got a couple of updates here. Savage Leap, just a little bit of a damage bump in competitive modes. That is another change that kind of got hit pretty hard, and main hand sword. Part of the reason why main hand sword isn't quite as good as it may have used to be. Nice note here for Final Thrust is that a portion of the bleeding is now going to be always applied, and this is kind of mirroring the power damage component of the skill, where you do about 50% max damage if the target is above half, and 100% of your max damage if the target is under half. Currently, all the bleeding happens if they're under half. Now it will be a similar case where you'll inflict, 3 bleed stacks all the time, regardless of your opponent's health. And if they are under half, you will then get that full 6-stack amount.
Absolutely. And then just focusing on a couple of kind of underused utility skills that we typically don't really see being taken on Warrior very much. So do like Signet, Balance Stance, Signet Stamina, Frenzy. Just lowering some of the cooldowns. Making those skills seem a little bit more attractive to use.
It's going to be interesting because if you take the cooldown reduction trait too,
there.
that's actually going to be...
But then there at the bottom, we've got, again, these are kind of focused a little bit on bringing the power level of the Spellbreaker build that we've seen PvP down. So Banner of Defense is going to have a cooldown increase. If your Spell also will have a bit of a cooldown increase. And we're lowering the healing on Adrenal Health there in PvP as well. And then I'll quickly just hide our cameras.
Well, hold on.
Okay.
Some people may have figured out this change. This is actually the real teaser image of the stream. What's this?
I did this on purpose, obviously.
Completely unintentional, but it's kind of fun.
It was on purpose.
It looks like not important. Just hide the cams. Yeah, go for it. Martial cadence.
Well, where are those voices coming from?
From 3 to 2.
All right.
There you go.
There's
obviously a nod to kind of the potential of DPS Bladesworn's ability to output quickness. If you say put 4 Bladesworns in your party, you may be able to output full quickness uptime, which is generally something we may frown upon.
Especially because, even while taking, that trait, you're still doing, tons, more than enough damage on Bladesworn.
A bajillion damage.
It felt as though you were getting a bit too much quickness and a little bit too easily. So we are, again, kind of focusing on that Bladesworn build, but just in general lowering that ability to output as much quickness there. Moving on, we've got Spellbreaker and Berserker specific changes, and we will, I believe, go back in game just to take a look at some of this Berserker stuff because it is pretty fun. But we'll obviously show that up on screen for a second.
Yeah, so
champion.
Running through a few things here on the PV side, we're bumping up the damage a little bit. We see Arc Divider getting a power increase, Thundering Leap, cooldown coming down significantly in PvE, 25 to 15, 20 to 15 in competitive. So we're seeing a slight shave to the damage and the Berserk duration increase on that skill in PvE just because the cooldown is going to be that much lower.
Oh, I love all of this.
But it also is going to give you Aegis. So this is kind of a similar idea behind Cyclone Trigger, where it's instead of putting a full evade or a full block on this type of ability, it's just it feels a lot better to have that more like skill-based single shot Aegis as the defensive component. And as we're looking to kind of bring up Berserker's defensive capabilities in competitive modes a little bit, Sundering Leap is kind of one of those options for Power Berserker.
I love Berserker, but why?
Cooldown reduction on the... What's the other skill name? I always forget.
Shattering Blow?
Shattering Blow, yeah. It's been a while since I played Shattering Blow. And obviously, the block skill on Berserker, slightly lower cooldown in competitive modes once again.
Absolutely.
So, Roy's showing off some of this stuff. I think one of the coolest changes on this list is going to be the adjustment to Eternal Champion.
Yep.
So this is a Grandmaster trait that's gotten a full rework because it's kind of intended to be the more defensive-focused Berserker Grandmaster trait.
2 stacks?
Nice. And it's just not really that great. It's not very exciting. Even when it is great, it's like, okay, I've increased toughness in Berserk mode.
Entering and exiting, great. I guess.
So this is an opportunity to do something maybe a little bit crazy. And the way this trait works now is that it will give you stability and endurance when you enter Berserk mode. And it will now also cause any trait that triggers on entering Berserk mode to also trigger on exiting Berserk mode. And so this obviously has some offensive potential as well because you're going to be getting swiftness or quickness and super speed from Fatal Frenzy, but you're also going to be re-triggering, Dead or Alive, re-triggering Feel No Pain, these defensive elements that is going to potentially give you a little bit more.
Yeah, that's a little bit nuts.
Power once Berserk
because that's also a stun break.
The gap a little bit between your Berserk mode,
well, that's
ending and the next time you can enter Berserk mode.
That's nuts.
That's a very powerful, really powerful effect.
That's extremely.
Something else that's
people may notice
tooltip.
Showing it off, Roy. It is on the tooltip.
Oh, it is on the tooltip. Excuse me.
Reminder
That Cal, didn't mention is that you now are able to exit Berserk mode on demand.
Amazing.
Which obviously is not something you could do previously when you're in Berserk mode. So you can trigger all of those on trigger, on enter, on exit.
That gives you another stun break.
On demand while you are in Berserk mode.
God tier now.
And so obviously, just the effects themselves are going to be pretty strong, but having the ability to again, choose when you want to activate those abilities, we felt was going to be pretty nice for Berserk. And that's obviously only when you take this trait.
Right, and that's kind of a nod to some of these effects being a little bit more situational, like getting stability or getting incoming damage reduction. You want it when you want it, and if you have to enter and then you wait 15 seconds or add some Berserk extension on there as well to get that effect, then that's not always going to line up with
Boon
what
Berserker
you want.
Like Boon Berserker,
and
just
so
like
you're obviously going to have some trade-off there. You're going to exit Berserk
world.
mode early in order to re-trigger those effects whenever you want. And kind of an important note is that Feel No Pain will not stun break on the way out.
Nuts.
It will only stun break when you enter Berserk mode. We kind of adjusted the wording just of that trait to communicate that a little bit more explicitly. It will only stun break on entry, not on exit.
Well, that's pointless.
Damage reduction component on exit.
Oh, they're so afraid to buff warrior.
We got the Spellbreaker specific changes there on the bottom of the page. Again, the bottom one, of course, is going to be focused on the competitive modes. So right now, Breaching Strike doing a little bit too much damage in competitive modes, so we have lowered that by a tad from 50% to 5%, the bonus damage against enemies with no boons.
Yeah, well, maybe a little bit too high. That was definitely a PvE-centric idea of increase the damage when there's no boons. The bonus is just significantly too high in competitive, so it's no longer. The last note here is actually pretty important and pretty impactful, and again, kind of a hit to Spellbreaker in competitive modes. Full counter, currently on live, if you absorb an attack, you block an attack, that is when full counter decides that you have successfully used a burst skill, and it triggers stuff like Adrenal Health, triggers stuff like, oh boy, what are all the traits called? Berserker's Power, all those things that care about using or hitting with a burst skill that most burst skills require a hit. Full counter does not. It's probably much too easy to trigger these effects, and so now it is also going to require a strike. We're kind of shifting that behavior around. Longbow, still gets to do its thing, I guess, for now, where throw a fire field on the ground and you get all your triggers. But full counter is going to demand that you hit somebody with this ability to get Adrenal Health. To get
Candy Spellbreaker there.
And this is really a nod to kind of introducing additional counterplay and making sure that if you are dodging full counter, that is a viable way to prevent Spellbreaker sustain from being at the level that it is. And obviously we nerfed Adrenal Health a little bit in this patch too, but just introducing, kind of fixing this mechanic to behave consistently with a lot of other burst skills was another thing that we definitely wanted to do with Spellbreaker's performance.
Absolutely. Now, I believe before we move on to the next slide, I think that is it for the warrior changes, unless I'm just forgetting something, which means we can now reveal the second portion of the teaser image, which is pretty exciting. Yeah,
Who saw this coming? Probably everybody. I love how we always make a big deal about this, but it's like,
it's so exciting.
How many people got it? Raise your hands in chat.
Actually, I didn't get it, so I can't raise my hand.
But
yes, I think we can go ahead and talk about it. So if you noticed in the back of the image, and I guess we probably should have imaged it again, but there is an animation going on from a Mesmer. And so people who may have recognized it would have known that that was the old Mantra, I think, of Pain animation. And we are, in fact, reworking mantras. Something important to note here is this is going to affect Guardian mantras as well, which we will, of course, touch upon when we go to the Guardian section. But yes, mantras are going to be reworked for Mesmer. We've also got some shield usability improvements, as well as, I think Cal mentioned this earlier, he did spoil it, some group might updates there for Chrono. But take it away with the mantras.
Let's talk about mantras a little bit, because mantras, maybe about a year and a half ago, we reworked mantras to be more of this purely ammo based. We basically removed the casting necessity, the pre-casting necessity of mantras. And we made a big post about this. There were a few reasons that were given as to why this change was made. And we've kind of seen the effects of this change and how it's impacted the gameplay depth of mantras, how it's affected the identity of mantras. And fundamentally, it's just not really a mantra anymore, and we feel like a lot was lost in the previous rework. So for this update, we went back and we thought about it. We looked at the reasons. Why did we do this in the first place? Are there other ways we can solve these problems? And we have a similar section on the update notes this time that talks specifically about the mantra changes. But I'll try to just cover everything real quickly here instead of taking 10 minutes like I did in the rehearsal. Basically, the first thing that we're trying to solve is that for Firebrand mantras, it feels really, really, really bad to have to recast all your mantras when you respawn or when you GG or when you change maps, and that is 100% true. And something that we talked about at the time and something that we decided not to do was, well, what if we just flipped over Firebrand mantras in PvE? If you're out of combat, if the skill's not on cooldown, why should we require players to cast this? Because realistically, it's just a waste of time. And having this cast time is still important in competitive modes, having the kind of the counterplay and the gameplay of there is a risk to using mantras and using the final charge and having that skill come back and having to cast this potentially in a combat situation. That's really important. But in PvE, it doesn't really matter. So that is going to be true for Firebrand mantras. Mesmer mantras are a little bit different because they do have the initial cast bonus, and essentially the reason why we made this change before was because Firebrand mantras specifically felt really bad to recast. So that's no longer going to be an issue in PvE. If Ro is in a PvE map, maybe you'll show it off once we actually get to the Firebrand section, but you will see the mantras kind of just automatically flip over as they're coming off cooldown.
It's interesting that the heal skill didn't start.
The other thing that we were trying to solve from the initial